Today, we are lucky to have Erin Mendenhall joining us. Erin is the mayor of Salt Lake City and just recently has been reelected for her second term. Now, you might say, hold up, Jeremy. Government, mayor, what does it have to do with products exactly? Well, we're going to dive into that. The correlation between what a government produces, packages up, and what a business does, and who the users are, and how do you understand them, and most importantly, how do you prioritize within that, even the big projects that a government has to do. So let's learn together on this interesting topic. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on.
Of course. So before we dive into a few different things, one is I want to give you a little background because it's interesting to have a mayor of a major city within a state like Utah, the capital city, on something like this, which is a product podcast. That seems unique. So let's bridge that gap a little bit. So what is it that we're trying to do? Really, what this podcast is about what is produced for and shipped for users' audience. What we're trying to do is kind of bridge that gap between what does it mean for government? How does that differ? What are some things? What is your perspective on that? So to dive into that, I'm hoping to start with a couple things. One is get to know you and what you're doing versus kind of just what our podcast is all about. So if you wouldn't mind, Erin, would you mind defining like what that organization looks like for you? Like the people within the organization and what you are in charge of within Salt Lake City.
Sure. This is going to be fun to explore what the relationship or the similarities, dissimilarities might be. So thanks again for having me on.
Yeah.
I'm the mayor of Salt Lake City, a city of about 200,000 people who doubles and gets up to about 500,000 people on any given workday. We're nestled along the Wasatch Front, the largest city in the state of Utah, and the center of sports, entertainment, commerce, recreation, and growing. So I serve in a strong mayor form of government, which just means that I am the CEO of the city. I do not serve on the city council. I have no authority in that legislative branch. And so we operate as the two branches of city government. We are within a county, Salt Lake County, and of course we have the state of Utah legislature, which is a supermajority Republican legislature here in the state, has been for a long time. We have not had a Democrat governor in about my lifetime, and I'm a Democrat. And Utah, Salt Lake City rather, has been a Democrat stronghold for many decades. So it's an interesting blue dot, red state situation. And lo and behold, we work really well together with my administration and the current setting of leaders at the state level that we have. And that has not always been the case. So we're getting a lot of things done.
And that's awesome. And this is something I'm familiar with, being from Utah. I'm curious about like what you mentioned, which is you have a legislation of the city, that city council, that's not under your purview. And then maybe there's the other part, which is legislation for a state that you may also deal with and work with. So if you wouldn't mind talking with like, what exactly is it that you do then? Like, is it the services of Salt Lake City? Is it the policies of Salt Lake City? And how those work? Because I think that gives us context to the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's certainly not the same in every state in our nation. That depends on state laws. And it's also not the same for every city in our state. You know, that the Mormon settlers came here and basically kicked out any indigenous tribes, the Ute tribe in particular, and took over this space, bought up and created water rights. Brigham Young secured a lot of water rights, even outside of what are our jurisdictional lands, our 110 square miles that are Salt Lake City proper. And so we oversee, for example, we are a water supplier and we bring water, treat water for more than our own residents and sell it to residents in other parts of Salt Lake County. Most cities don't do that. And you'll find other cities in the state of Utah who run their own power companies. We don't do that. We partner with Rocky Mountain Power and sign the agreement that makes it possible for them to deliver power to our residents. but cities do most of the things that you encounter on a daily basis. So I've already said, turning on the lights is a function that the city enables. It's also the city that is working with Rocky Mountain Power to get 100% net renewable energy into every outlet of every building in this entire city by 20.
That's
You
awesome.
go into your bathroom and turn the water on to brush your teeth. That water is brought to you, not only treated by the city, but brought through our conveyance system into your buildings or your homes. You flush the toilet, we take that end of the water too. We treat that at the city water treatment facility and pump 13 billion gallons into the Great Salt Lake when it's clean and treated. You get in your car and you pull out onto the street. We own and operate those sidewalks, the park strip between your sidewalk and the streets themselves, except for those big major roadways that are run by the state UDOT, and the street lights. You see an accident on your way to work. You call 911. That's Salt Lake City's 911. It's our police and fire department that show up. So there's just a lot of the
Yeah,
daily parts, your garbage pickup,
sure. Yeah.
your kids' aftercare at Youth City, the parks, the libraries, they're all Salt Lake City. Pretty much. There are some state and there are some county things going on here, but we oversee most of it in the city.
Yeah. I'm assuming a lot of that's thankless. It's like garbage recycling,
You
all
know,
the streets, thankless kind of stuff at some
yeah,
level.
you take it for
Yeah,
granted until you show
for
up
sure.
somewhere and you're like, this system doesn't work. It works really well at home. What's going
Exactly.
on?
Right.
Yeah.
So bridging that gap. Bridging the gap from what this podcast is, which is about products, to what you just mentioned. Generally speaking, we define product as something delivered, consumed, used by people, and for their need, and hence the name for this podcast, Products for People. And so, based upon that rough definition, what is it that you output? It sounds like there's services for the citizens, obviously, with the garbage, with streets. What would you say your major outputs are? Is
That's
like functions within like streets? Like what would you say that is?
I immediately think of it on a spectrum. The
Okay,
proximate those which are closest to me being those daily functional needs. So clean,
got it.
safe drinking water, public safety. The feeling that I am safe enough to walk my dog, drop my kid off at school and go to work, take our
Yeah,
roadway systems and open a business or show up at a place of business and feel like we are safe enough to function here and that this is a place to live and invest.
yeah,
It's those really tangible parts too, like our foothill trail systems and the parks and the libraries and the sidewalks and the cracks in the road and the potholes and all those parts that need to be fixed. But it's also about access to opportunity, more broadly speaking. And here in Utah, I think over the last several years, we've either ranked as the most economically mobile area in the country or very close to the most, where, for example, if you're born,
what does that mean?
yeah, if you're born into a family that is at or below the poverty level, let's say, and that maybe generationally has been, if you're born in this city and you're raised in this place, then you have a higher likelihood of economically elevating from the setting in which you were born because of this economy and this community here. Those are the kind of intangible, to some degree, examples
Mm-hmm.
of product that we are
Sure.
hyper focused on at the city level. So I'll give you a
Yeah.
specific example. We are north of the Silicon Slopes, and Josh is there in the Bay Area. Would have become unicorns south of us sail right past us and set
Yeah.
up shop about 40 miles south of here. And it really pissed me off. I was on the city council for
I
6 years.
I love that
I'm,
it pisses you off because it pisses me off too.
sometimes it's a good drive to get things done when you feel that
Yeah.
way. And I was sick of it. The city council in our city and other cities oversees the budget. They approve the budget that the mayor gets to recommend. And I wanted some of that revenue here, but I really wanted those job opportunities to come up here. The tech
Yeah.
industry has been the strongest in the state of Utah for several years now. It is a very mobile, economically mobile. So it's sticky once you're in the industry. People tend to stay in the industry, even if they move from company to company. And I wanted those opportunities in the city. So I became the mayor in 2020. I said, we're going to go hard on bringing Tech Lake City to life. We want to see more visibility to the companies that are already here. We want to brand it and have an identity there. And we believe that that will also help attract more like companies to see that we have an ecosystem, that the city's invested in it. And the reason is not only an economic reason. These are higher paying jobs on average than any other industry in the state of Utah. But this is about economic opportunity for our residents, because even though we've had one of the strongest recovering downtowns in the country, we had that spot for the best recovered downtown since the pandemic for some time. We've got the strongest economy in the nation for 16 years running in the state of Utah. But I'll tell you, if you look at the redlining map from 19 for Salt Lake City, and you look at our neighborhoods that were colored over in red pencil, and that the federal government said to banks, don't invest in these communities,
Is
those
that
neighborhoods
what you
are
mean by
still,
redlining?
yes, the redlining maps
Okay.
of this city are still predictive of so many of the outcomes of our residents today. And that is ridiculous to me. So the growth that we are experiencing is good for us if we get our hands into it and we shape it with that, with those opportunities to say, we want you here and we want to make it possible for our communities to benefit from this very opportunity. How can we do that for you?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Okay. Do you mind if I jump in here real quick?
Please.
Okay, great. So we talked a little bit about the structure of the government. We talked a little bit about the services, products offered. Let's jump into the audience. And I think the first parallel to the world of product development, general product delivery, is audience. Like, you have to know your audience. In the world of politics, you really have to know your audience. And that seems very difficult to me, honestly. So I want to figure out that with you. And obviously in the world of product development, you certainly need to know your audience. So we kind of want to dive into that. For this conversation, I'm going to use the idea of constituents or the receivers of said services as audience, just for to make sure we're on the same page. And we'll go from there. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I thought maybe we'd start at the basics. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what are the methods that you found most useful to know your very diverse audience. How do you actually know what they really need? And even though it's, spread across the whole city and all sorts of demographics, et cetera. So what are the methods that have worked well for you?
Cities, I'm a biased person here as mayor, but cities are where it's at in government because we are the closest to the people. And I'm always the mayor at the grocery store, at my kids' schools, when I'm out walking my dog, when I'm taking my garbage out. You are among your customers, as you might put it, your audience, all the time. And they are super honest by and large. Sometimes it's
But that feels weird sometimes.
there is no shortage of feedback on how the city is doing or how it's
Sure.
impacting them or what, perception or feeling or evidence they want to share with you. So I don't ever feel like we have a shortage of feedback, but we want to make sure that we're getting feedback as equitably as possible. So that's caused us, thanks to throwing everything up in the air for good reasons in 2020 and beyond, and trying to build equity into the hub of how we function, to question every way that we've gone about soliciting feedback so far. So recognizing the digital divide is a big piece of that, and the pandemic underscored that reality for us. Jeremy, did you want to jump in?
No. Sounds great.
Okay.
I was going to ask real quick, because you touched on this kind of idea of diversity of input. You just talked about, I've got constant feedback as the mayor, as I'm living in my community, I get constant feedback. But to your point earlier about divergent views, your circle is your circle, and the digital divide exists in terms of separation. Have you found anything that works in terms of going beyond those kind of little pods?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple examples. Early on in the pandemic in 2020, we, if you don't know this about Utah, but this is the headquarters of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Salt Lake City is the home stake in the world here for them. There's a lot of churches around. And we looked at where the digital divide exists in our city. And we asked the church if they would partner with us in installing Wi-Fi opportunities at neighborhood church locations so that kids could come and
That's smart.
get their schoolwork done. And it was an awesome partnership. It was a first leg in the door for us to start to set up more permanent infrastructure. We figured out how we weren't allowed to give away city-owned. We have 4,000 employees at the city. If my laptop gets old and I get a new one, I wasn't allowed to donate it to a community organization or a nonprofit. We had to sell it at an auction because it's a publicly owned good. So we changed the laws so that we could get laptops we didn't need or weren't using anymore out into the community. And we started to question more long-term the boards and commissions that give us so much of our feedback. Like, where should we be giving grant money? How should we be prioritizing affordable housing loans that developers want to get some of our money to build affordability into what would otherwise be a market rate product? How should we prioritize those? Where are we even allowing low-income housing to be inserted in the city where it didn't exist before, which you might expect, and what probably exists in most cities, which is that people who are participating in our boards and commissions had the economic security to take the time to do that. They had the kind of job flexibility or were retired so that they could literally come away and put that volunteer time in with the city. And potentially also lived in areas that were more engaged as a neighborhood than had been disengaged or disenfranchised in the past. So we have done some big things, taking our boards and commissions out into the communities instead of just meeting at City Hall, paying a stipend for people to participate, covering transit fees, and also being able to cover childcare costs so people can participate in our boards and commissions, get paid a little bit to do so, and have their family needs covered. So it's those kind of like, what does the table even look like? Where is the table literally set that we expect people to show up to? What are the times of day that people can show up?
Yeah.
You're working 2 shifts or you're working a swing every day and you've got 3 kids at home. There's no way you're going to come and sit in a planning commission meeting 2 nights a week from 5 to 8:30 p.m. So we've been trying to shift by listening to the community who's saying, we want to show up, but here's the reasons you've made it impossible.
That's great. Can I ask also a little bit about the data side of things? So a lot of what you've talked about is kind of living in the community, getting feedback from boards, working to cross the digital divide, inviting more people into that kind of circle of feedback. Do you guys also work with any structural data analysis or data gathering to get feedback from audience?
Yes. Yeah, actually, we gather so much data and didn't utilize the data in a cohesive way to be proactive about our investments or equitably responsive to what we historically have done. And that was a big task we jumped into when I became the mayor in January of 2020, building a GIS team that's now consolidating our data into layers that can be consumed in packages, giving us real-time indicators on a lot of like quality of life aspects of neighborhoods that we responded to, like we'll say increases in graffiti in a neighborhood. We have a nice 24-hour response where we'll show up quickly, but did that information come back to help us know something might be shifting in this neighborhood? Along with examples like utility shutoff. What if we have a spike in families and households that are getting warnings because they've stopped being able to pay their utility bill? And what does this tell us about a neighborhood? But I would tell you go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say a lot of that is in the world of product development. It's almost like product analytics. You're kind of you're measuring what is going on with the services you're delivering to your citizens. Thank you to those people, to those lovely people. But you're measuring that, and you're seeing some results on that. So that's fantastic. Do you guys also do any sort of surveying of like, tell me what you think about our pothole situation or water cleanliness or something like that? Do you need doing surveying?
We do, but only every 2 years. And we've thought about increasing the frequency of this. It's a pretty exhaustive survey, but we also have been, I think, rightfully questioning the demographics that respond. We're pretty good on the, like age, gender, income brackets, but not necessarily as geographically representative as I think that we should be. So we haven't increased the frequency, but we have built a mayor's liaison team. So that's a team of about 6 people in my office who show up to every community-based meeting that happens in our city. And there's like more than 30 community councils in Salt Lake City. And then there's school community councils, and there's all, different entities that will have community activities. And we show up there instead of them needing to come to us. One other part is because I was on the city council for 6 years before I was the mayor, I cut my teeth in public service by, standing in front of a community council and getting my butt kicked every 2 weeks. For 6 years and in 5 different community councils every month. So I love just the intimacy of knowing your neighbors throughout the area you represent and their honesty about what isn't working, not just the infrastructure, but from a community support aspect and passing budgets that reflect those needs and making money available for community-based ideas. So I think, just as I think our federal government functions better when there are people in those leadership roles who have worked at the most local level, I think that it's really powerful to have mayors who have sat on the legislative side of their city and understand the full function.
Well, speaking of that, like when you're talking about standing in front of an audience, whether that's a council or a committee, and now as mayor, how do you prioritize? Like there are a lot of needs. I'm sure that you get, like you mentioned, grocery store. Someone's like, "Hey, this pothole in my street, fix it, Erin." Like I'm sure there's some things that happen a lot to you, and like you said, very frank feedback. How do you even begin to prioritize? Like, because it's probably not the latest person that said something to you. It's probably more impact or something like that. But I'm not sure how you do that. So walk us through how you begin to even prioritize feedback that you do receive.
Yeah, I think prioritizing feedback is easier in a way than prioritizing our response or our investments.
Okay.
I think that what I look for in public servants and leaders is willingness to be vulnerable. And part of that is being emotionally accessible. It doesn't mean that you can crush me, but it means that I can hear you and I can relate to your fear, your concern, your frustration as a human being, as a fellow resident in this city. And then I can thank you for sharing that with me. And what I do when I turn around and go back to my office or talk to my team is we get to contextualize that in how does this complaint or advice help us to advance our goals around equity, around economic stability and strength, opportunities for our residents, growing opportunities, new opportunities, and for helping us reach that next level. We're in a really unique place in Salt Lake City, really in the state of Utah, but concentrated here in our city of tremendous growth happening right now. Even through the pandemic, we continue to grow. You know that we have Major League Baseball as a major interest to recruit here to Salt Lake, National Hockey
also heard
League.
NHL, yeah.
Yes, and ambitions. We are getting ready to sign a contract and bring the Winter Olympics and Paralympics back here for 2034. We should be signing that contract in July of this year. And
that's awesome.
We're doubling our downtown residential population between 2020 and this time next year, from about 4,900 to 10,000 people in the central business district.
Wait, did you just say you're doubling the population of downtown in a year?
From 2020 to this time
Oh, from
next year.
2020. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
In 5 years,
That's
we're doubling that population.
wow.
Yeah, and big opportunities around making Main Street a pedestrian corridor from South
Yeah.
Temple to Fourth South, building a green loop that takes some of our Brigham Young 6 ox cart U-turn wide streets of 100 feet and turning
This
them
is a very
into
Utah thing, people. But I know it.
this is for real. It's Brigham buying water rights and making really wide streets are
Super
two
wide.
really good things that he did.
Awkwardly wide
Yes,
streets.
6 ox cart U-turn. That was the rule of thumb, in case you didn't. In case you haven't U-turned your ox cart lately down here, you can't. Or we can turn them into a linear park. So anyway, these are,
Yeah.
generational and the kind of transformations that would change our face for the next 50 years or more. Incredibly exciting. So prioritizing and context is really first, I think about contextualizing. What is the opportunity here? It's the emotional part of it doesn't need to be suppressed or ignored, but you have to bring the context of how it advances your goals. And I've got a great team of people who surround me and love to tell me, that's a really bad idea, Mayor. Or no, we shouldn't do that. And I think surrounding yourself with people like that helps you build the best context to make decisions.
That's awesome. I love the contextualization that you mentioned, because I think that's, again, we're talking parallels to business as well. And I think a lot of what you just mentioned is spot on. You can prioritize in a vacuum, but you can't prioritize if, you can prioritize within context, like as far as what is needed within this particular framework. So I like that.
And you set a plan, you get your
Yeah.
annual plan, and things happen. And the market happens, and new opportunities or things happen that you didn't want. Like 2 years ago, just over a year ago, actually, our AAA baseball team said, we're not going to renew our contract. And we bought all this land outside of the city and we're going to build a new ballpark. I didn't plan that 11 months earlier. That wasn't on our list of things to accomplish that year. But I had to bring in the context and say, what is our opportunity here? And we went big and asked the Miller Family Foundation if they would spearhead $100 million human capital investment in that neighborhood, and they said yes. So you work with what happens in the world, and always, I think, trying to find the best path.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. And you kind of mentioned something else, which I think, I don't know if it's unique. It might be. It sounds unique to me as far as when I think about cities and planning. You have a distinct roadmap. You have a distinct plan that you've gone out there with. And then part of your prioritization is, does it align to that roadmap? Does it align to your plan? I think that's really awesome. Would you mind speaking through how you get to that roadmap and how you present that to others?
By roadmap, are you referring to the slcmayorplan.com website?
Yes.
Okay. The published roadmap. Yep.
And apologies, I'm using business terms. Yes,
annual plan. That's
annual plan.
Probably the right speak.
Sorry. Yeah, that sounds great.
That is a unique thing. It wasn't something that had been done in the city before, but I knew from serving on the council, watching two administrations while I was on the council, that there's kind of the baseline of services and functions that you have to do day in and day out. And then there's what are your priorities that I can tangibly expect you to achieve this year, above and beyond what we should expect of you. And being transparent about what those additions are, and then being accountable to whether or not you did them, or they changed along the way, and how did they change, or you decided actually this was a bad idea and we're not going to do it. I think it was kind of courageous that we decided to do that, because when you set out and you say, here's my goals, it's kind of like at the new year and I'm telling everybody what my New Year's resolutions are. And then I probably don't want to talk to you about it by October, because maybe I haven't stayed on the treadmill all those months. But the city turned out to be we were very good at getting our goals done. So every year in January, we publish what our ambitions are above and beyond what you already need and expect. And then the following 12 months later, we give ourselves a grade and we tell you where we're standing. And this is our 5th year of doing that. But Jeremy,
awesome.
That's not really what you asked me.
Well, it's part of what I asked. And I think that's fantastic because that's unique. It seems unique.
It is. I don't know. I hope there's other cities that do it. I haven't found them yet. So if some listener knows about that, send your city's plan our way.
Would you recommend other cities doing it? Because you said earlier, you're basically setting yourself up for accountability for the, good or bad. Would you recommend other cities do this?
I don't know what I know of other mayors is that we all have different relationships with the function of the corporations we're overseeing. And I have an incredible amount of earned trust in Salt Lake City Corporation. And, any mayor who's in office today, who was in office in 2020 also has been through a lot. Cities went through a lot. I mean, cities are where we live and breathe, and through the pandemic and through our reckoning with our history and our current situation of racism in this nation. We had a 5.7 earthquake in 2020. We had a hurricane strength windstorm in the city. It was a wild
within
year.
like a week. That was crazy.
It was a lot.
It was crazy.
Anyway, my point is just that I know what we're capable of. We know what we're capable of. And I feel like it's the appropriate thing for us to continue to challenge ourselves with transparency and accountability, not just when we're under the pressure of a environmental crisis or the other pressures we've experienced. And we should do it every single day.
I feel like you just hit on something really important to that. Like for every kind of leader out there who's thinking, hey, I want to project forward of what we're going to accomplish. I think you hit on a couple key aspects of that. And the first is knowing your organization and knowing what your organization is capable of. And then secondly, have built the trust, bi-directional trust necessary to then go about executing that. And so I think there could be a knee-jerk reaction of just like, I want to publish, this is what we're going to do. But wait, know your audience, know your team before you get to that point. So thanks. That was great.
Thanks.
Well, Erin, I know that we're at time here. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate this. We do. And this is so useful for our audience as we think about translating what we're doing and how to be better at our jobs and our functions. So thank you so much for joining us.
It's been really fun.
Hi, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd appreciate it if you could leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help spread the word. Our podcast is produced and designed by Jeremy and Joshua Wold. You can find our show archive and transcripts at productsforpeoplepodcast.com. We look forward to seeing you for our next episode. And in the meantime, we hope you experience some really great products. Thanks.